The golden child and the afterthought, choosing myself over toxic family ties. Growing up, I always knew my sister Clara was the favorite. I don't say that in a bitter, jealous way. I state it as a simple fact. If there were ever any doubts, my parents made it painfully clear time and again that she was the golden child. She was the one who could do no wrong. The one who made them proud. Of me? I was just there. The afterthought, the backup. It didn't bother me too much when we were kids. Sure, Clara got the newest clothes while I inherited her hand-me-downs. And yes, my parents gushed over every little thing she did while barely acknowledging my own achievements. But I told myself it didn't matter. Then came Clara's wedding. She was marrying a man my parents adored. He came from money, his family was well connected. And my parents treated the entire affair like the event of the century. The preparations started almost a year in advance. The venue? A breathtaking ballroom in a 5-star hotel. The guest list? Hundreds of people, some of whom Clara barely knew, but my parents insisted were important. The dress? A custom-made designer gown that cost more than my entire college tuition. Nothing was too much for Clara. Only the best would do. You deserve a perfect day, my mother gushed, watching as Clara tried on her veil. The whole family was involved in the planning. Every conversation, every phone call, every weekend was dedicated to picking out florals, taste-testing cakes, or visiting potential venues. My parents footed the bill for everything. Without hesitation, I stood on the sidelines, watching it all unfold. When the big day came, it was like something out of a movie. A grand ceremony, a live band, an after-party that lasted until the early hours of the morning. My parents beamed with pride the entire night. Then, less than a year later, I got engaged. I was excited, nervous, and most of all, hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, this would be different. Maybe this time they'd show even a fraction of the enthusiasm they had for Clara. I sat my parents down, took a deep breath, and said, "David and I are getting married." My mother blinked. "Oh. Just oh." My father didn't even look up from his phone. When I hesitated, adding, "We're planning a small courthouse wedding. Nothing big, just something simple and meaningful." That was when my mother let out a tiny, amused scoff. "A courthouse wedding," she repeated, as if I had just told her we were eloping in a gas station parking lot. My father chuckled. "Well, I guess that does suit you." I felt my stomach drop. "What's that supposed to mean?" My mother waved a dismissive hand. "You're not really the type for a big wedding. That's more your sister's thing. More my sister's thing. Just like everything else." I forced a smile. "Right. Well, we're really happy with our choice." "That's nice, dear," my mother said, already checking her watch. "Anything else?" That was it. No excitement, no questions, no offers to help. No congratulations, just indifference. I swallowed down the lump in my throat and nodded. "No, that's all." I should have expected it. I should have known. But when I walked out of that house, I made a decision. A decision that days later would make my parents panic. The day of my wedding was quiet. No grand ballrooms, no extravagant floral arrangements. No crowd of guests waiting with cameras. Just David and me, standing hand in hand at the courthouse, exchanging vows in front of a judge. And you know what? It was perfect. I didn't need a massive venue or a designer dress to feel special. When David looked at me and said, "I promise to love you forever," I knew this was exactly where I was meant to be. Afterward, we had a small dinner at our favorite restaurant with a few close friends. They cheered for us, toasted to our happiness, and made us feel like the luckiest people in the world. The only thing missing? My parents. I had sent them a text the night before, just to give them one last chance. "We're getting married tomorrow at 11 a.m. at the courthouse. You're welcome to come." In response, not a single word. I woke up the next morning hoping, just hoping, that maybe they would surprise me. That maybe I'd see them waiting for me outside the courthouse, ready to at least pretend to care. But they never showed. And that was the moment I truly realized I was done. A week later, I got a text from my mom. "Hope the wedding went well." That was it. No, how was it? No congratulations. No, we wish we could have been there. Just a generic, hollow message. I didn't even bother responding. David and I moved on with our lives. We started planning our future, talking about our next steps, where we wanted to live, what we wanted to do next. It felt like a fresh start, one where I no longer had to chase after the approval of people who would never give it to me. Then one day my phone started ringing. It was my father. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Hello. His voice was sharp, urgent. Where are you? I frowned. What? Your mother and I have been trying to reach you for days. You're not answering your texts, you're not calling back. I've been busy, I said flatly. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then in a much softer voice he said, Come back home. We need to talk. I almost laughed. Now they wanted to talk. I leaned against the kitchen counter, gripping the phone tightly. Why? Because we're your family, he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I exhaled slowly, feeling something inside me harden. No, I said, my voice firm. You were never my family. Not really. Then I hung up. Seconds later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. Please just come back, Mom texted. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty ignoring them. I had spent too many years waiting for them to love me the way they loved Clara. But I wasn't waiting anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt free. No more chasing, no more trying. No more hoping. I had spent years convincing myself that if I was patient enough, if I was good enough, one day my parents would see me. But now I saw myself. And that was enough. Or so I thought. Because my parents weren't done with me yet. A few days later, David and I were sitting in our tiny apartment, eating takeout on the couch, when there was a loud, rapid knocking at the door. I frowned. We weren't expecting anyone. David got up first, glancing through the peephole. His expression darkened. It's your parents. My stomach tightened. For a moment, I considered not answering, letting them knock and knock until they gave up. But I knew my parents, they didn't just give up. So I took a deep breath and opened the door. My mother stood there, arms crossed, looking both furious and exasperated. My father was behind her, his lips pressed into a tight line. Finally, my mother said, pushing past me into the apartment. Do you know how worried we've been? I stared at her, then at my father, who followed her inside without an invitation. Worried? I repeated. You ignored my wedding. Didn't respond to my messages for days. And now you're showing up at my door pretending to care? My mother scoffed. Don't be dramatic. We didn't ignore you. You didn't come. My voice was eerily calm. You didn't even say congratulations. You treated my wedding like it didn't matter, like I don't matter. She rolled her eyes. Oh, for God's sake. It was a courthouse wedding. What did you expect, a standing ovation? David took a step closer, his jaw tightening, but I placed a hand on his arm. I exhaled slowly. I expected something. But I guess that was my mistake. My father, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. This is getting ridiculous, he said. You're acting like we did something horrible. I let out a cold laugh. You did do something horrible. You spent a fortune on my sister's wedding and treated mine like an afterthought. You've always treated me like an afterthought. My mother huffed. Your sister's wedding was different. She what? I cut her off. She's more important, more worthy of love. Silence. And that silence told me everything. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, we're here because we don't want to lose you. You're still our daughter. I shook my head. No. I was just a backup option, a placeholder. And now that I'm finally done playing that role, now you want to talk. Neither of them responded. I took a deep breath. I'm not coming back. And I don't want to talk to either of you anymore. My mother's face twisted with anger. You're being selfish. I smiled. For once? Yeah, I am. And with that, I walked to the door, holding it open. They stared at me for a long moment, waiting for me to cave, waiting for me to beg like I used to. But I didn't. Eventually, my mother let out a frustrated sigh and stormed past me. My father followed, pausing only briefly at the door. This is your choice, he said quietly. I met his gaze. It is. Then I shut the door. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still resting on the door handle, listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway. David placed a hand on my shoulder. You okay? I turned to him and to my surprise I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a forced one, a real, genuine smile. Yeah, I said. I think I am. Because for once I hadn't given in. I hadn't let them twist my emotions, hadn't let them manipulate me into feeling guilty. I chose myself. And that was a choice I was going to keep making. The silence from my parents was deafening at first. No texts, no calls, no desperate attempts to reel me back in. At first, I thought maybe, just maybe, they finally got it, that they realized they couldn't treat me like an afterthought anymore. But I should have known better. Because 3 weeks later my sister called. I stared at my phone screen, her name flashing across it. I hadn't spoken to her since before my wedding. David glanced over. You don't have to answer. I hesitated, then with a sigh I picked up. Hello. Oh my God, my sister said immediately. Mom is losing her mind over this. She's been crying for days. She keeps saying she just wanted the best for you, and that you overreacted. I let out a slow breath. I didn't overreact. She groaned. You know how she is. She doesn't think before she speaks, but she loves you. She just. I cut her off. Did she send you to call me? Silence. Then quietly she said, she asked me to talk to you, to make you see reason. I almost laughed. See reason? You mean apologize to her? I mean fix this, she said, exasperated. She and Dad don't want to lose you. They were just upset that you got married so suddenly. They thought you'd wait for a real wedding. I felt a wave of exhaustion crash over me. You mean, like your wedding? I asked. The one they spent thousands on? The one they wouldn't stop bragging about? She hesitated. It's not my fault they did that. I never said it was. I swallowed hard. But do you know what it was like for me? Watching them pour everything into you while I got nothing. She was quiet. I sighed. Look, I'm not angry at you. But I'm done begging them to care about me the way they care about you. They do care about you, she said softly. They just show it differently. I let out a humorless chuckle. If that's what you want to believe, fine. But I'm not coming back. Not this time. There was a long silence. Then finally she sighed. Okay. And just like that, the call ended. I thought that would be the last of it. But a few days later my mother texted me again. Your father is sick. He wants to see you. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Because I knew my mother, and I knew exactly what kind of game she was playing. I sat there staring at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. David sitting next to me. Notice my expression. What is it? I turned the phone toward him. His eyes scanned the message and immediately he frowned. Do you believe her? That was the problem. I wanted to believe her. Because no matter what they'd done, no matter how much they'd hurt me, the idea of my father being sick, truly sick, sent a wave of panic crashing over me. What if I ignored it? And something really was wrong? What if I regretted this for the rest of my life? She's never said anything like this before, I murmured. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. I get it. But it just feels convenient, doesn't it? The second you start standing your ground, suddenly there's a family emergency. I knew he had a point, but the fear still lingered. Finally, I exhaled sharply and typed out a response. Me. What's wrong with him? A minute passed, then 2. Then my phone buzzed again. Mom. He's just not feeling well. You should come home. I froze. David peered over my shoulder. That's vague. I gritted my teeth. If it were really serious, she'd say what it was. She'd be panicking, she'd be begging, not just vaguely telling me to come home. I looked at David, anger slowly replacing my worry. She's lying. He nodded. Yeah, she is. A deep simmering rage built in my chest. They had no limits, no shame, no hesitation in manipulating me if it meant getting what they wanted. But this time, it wasn't going to work. So I texted back. Me. If he's actually sick, take him to a doctor. But if this is just another manipulation tactic, I'm done. For good. This time. There was no immediate reply. Minutes passed, then an hour, then a day. And just as I suspected, silence. Days later, my sister texted me. Mom's furious. She says you accused her of lying. I scoffed at my screen. I replied. That's because she was lying. Sister texted, "Dad's fine by the way. Not sick at all." And there it was. Cold, hard proof that they would do anything to get me back under their control. I should have been hurt. I should have been devastated. But instead, I just felt done. I stared at my sister's message for a moment, then typed my final response. Tell Mom she finally got what she wanted. She doesn't have to worry about me being in her life anymore. Then I blocked their numbers. All of them. Because I wasn't going to let them guilt trip me, manipulate me, or drag me back into their toxic cycle. I was finally free. And this time, I wasn't looking back. It's hard to imagine how a parent could go so far as to lie about a serious illness just to manipulate their own child. But in the end, Opie saw right through it and chose themselves, something their family clearly never did. Was cutting them off the right move? It's tough. But after years of being treated as an afterthought, Opie finally set a boundary and stuck to it. And honestly, that takes strength. What do you think? Did Opie handle it the right way? Or should they have given their family only one last chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you think OP made the right call, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.